Hi, my name is Emma, and I'm a student in the Doctorate of Athletic Training program here at Indiana State University. Today we are going to be talking about the book Extreme Ownership and how it relates to healthcare informatics. And I will let Jamie introduce herself and Nico Merritt introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jamie Nikiander. As Emma said, I'm also a student in the Doctorate of Athletic Training program.
And as Emma said, my name is Nico Merritt, and I'm also a student in Indiana State University's Doctorate of Athletic Training program.
So reading the first couple of chapters, you guys, what were your first sort of thoughts or themes that you got in terms of informatics?
I think one of the biggest parts that I got from both chapters was the fact that the leader had to be communicating well throughout the entire process without any interjection from themselves or any like outside force acting upon their own decisions, and they had to take full ownership of everything that happened, which happens in healthcare. You know, if you make the mistake, then it's on you. But really, if there's a lack of communication, it can cause chaos, it can cause injury, it can cause a lot of issues with communication amongst all of the staff or individuals involved. In the case of the blue on blue incident in the first chapter. And I think it's one of the biggest things where if plans get altered, then notifications should happen between all healthcare providers and the patient and anyone else involved, be it coaches or staff and other athletic trainers, physicians. And if that doesn't happen, then the communication is lost, and you could have an individual going faster or harder than they need to be. They could be getting care that they don't necessarily need. They could miss out on an opportunity to receive care that they do need. And it can be one of those instances where if that individual, in terms of the leader, isn't communicating well, then you can have a blue on blue incident with your patient where they're actually hurting themselves, or your healthcare team is hurting itself by going along the process in the completely different way than was originally planned.
Yeah, I really felt like that kind of blue on blue poor communication incident can be translated, as you said, to a healthcare team really well. You know, it said that one particular SEAL team was moving or relocating and they didn't communicate that. And I think that that happens amongst healthcare providers all the time. So as athletic trainers, as physicians, as chiropractors, as physical therapists, any one of them can make a medical decision about patient care, change something, move something, you know, any of those things. And without communicating, we get lost in translation, I think. So I think that that can really damage the patient's care simply because we could potentially be contradicting something that somebody else said without knowing it. So I think that is part of where informatics come from, is whether we're going to talk to them through email, text, person, or simply through our documentation being better and having access to other people's documentation. So getting in contact with team physicians and physical therapists to make sure we're all on the same page, I think is going to limit that miscommunication that could hinder patient care all around.
And I think that lends to how that scene closed. After that situation happened, they had a huge debrief. And, you know, after, you know, Nico, you host a huge track event. Probably the most important part of that is talking about what went well and what didn't. I think that can be applied really easily as well. It lends to the continuous assessment of our documentation strategies. Is it working? Is it not? Are we communicating with our staff? How are these staff meetings going? Are they productive? Are they not? What did you guys sort of think of the continuous assessment that they did, in that the leader should never be satisfied, you know, that we should always be improving? Are there parts in your clinical practice where you maybe do that, or or see the relationship to that portion of the book?
I mean, I think as the example that you put, I think we definitely, in emergency situations or more serious things, we always have that debrief. But I can definitely see where on a day-to-day basis or something like that, I think that assessment of ourselves and our strengths and our weaknesses, what went well, what didn't go well, should happen more often. I don't think it should take an emergency situation for us to be kind of talking about those things. I actually am creating a documentation policy for a better one for my clinical practice right now, simply because I did see that need, that it wasn't consistent even between three people who work in the same room every day. I don't think the communication was as solid as it could be. So if I was in the gym, someone was making a decision about my patient that I didn't know about. And so I think that even something smaller, day-to-day decisions on, whether we're going to let you go to practice today or not, are things that we can continuously kind of assess on whether or not we're communicating well.
And going along with that, the communication portion of this, as the leader, you have to take full responsibility if it's happening or not. And if it's not, then you have to find out why and fix it. And I think one of the biggest things, I was reading the part about the boats and all the people in the boat, and they were like having to do all this crazy stuff, and they're chafing and bleeding and blistered, and they had to do all this stuff. And all I could think about was, oh my gosh, I wouldn't want to be on the losing team. And then they start talking about if they lose, they have to do more stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this sucks. And then if you get stuck on that losing team and you stay on the losing team, you just get beat up and no one cares. Like, they hate you more. They're like, you're not winning, so you need to work harder. But really, if your team gives up, and like you might be the one person that's trying to like get them going, if your team gives up, then I mean, in that case, it's funny because when I was looking at that, I was like, all right, well, yeah, leader takes full responsibility. It's the job of the leader to get everything done. If the leader isn't successful to motivate the group, then the group is unsuccessful as well. But what if the group just is exhausted? And I get where he was going, where, okay, switch leaders and, oh, they did a lot better, but that's also like, they got rid of the guy who was, in lack of a better term, a jerk, and like, I'm a leader, come on, you guys suck, it's not my fault, like, if you change that perspective, then the perspective of the group changes. So yeah, no bad leaders, but I also feel like there could be bad individuals, and depending on the situation, you can't just fire everyone who doesn't work well. That was kind of his, in terms of the vice president and everything. It was like, all right, well, if you have people who are insubordinate, you should just fire them. I'm like, well, in the case of the boats, you couldn't fire anyone. You had to deal with it and move on. They had to be able to function as a group, and if they didn't, then they had to do more and get punished. And if they got punished, then it was even harder to succeed and get the goal in the end. So I guess in a sense, in healthcare, if you hit that point where everyone, and this happens a lot with people who have a patient who isn't getting better, the physician basically gives up and says, well, I don't know what to do. The athletic trainer is searching for people to help them. The patient is completely distraught and they want to return to activity, but no one really is helping them. If documentation, in my personal experience, this has actually happened, if documentation is poor, then there's no history on what's going on with the patient for them to be able to see a physician in the right way. And then you literally have to tell the patient, we messed up. And they will be really mad, so, and that's a horrible situation to walk into. But I kind of want to get your guys' perspective on, so in a situation where you obviously can't just fire someone because you need them to be part of the group, how do you handle that situation as a leader?
I think the biggest take home that I got that I think I can apply to your question is that the leader must train the underperformer. So, maybe there is that one person in our team, at Indiana State Athletic Training that is maybe not performing as well, or maybe there's an athlete that's not getting better. But again, it's the role of the leader to maybe take that patient or that colleague aside and say, what do you need? Because like you said, I agree with the book to an extent, but I do feel like we all need different things from our leader. We communicate differently. We need to be pushed differently. We have different motivators. So I think if I were in that situation, I would truly reflect on what I can do for the leader and what type of leadership the person needs and what motivators. But again, I don't think we can't just fire everybody, which I agree with. But I think the biggest takeaway was training the underperformer, but training them to individualize their efforts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think if there is a larger ideal about athletic training or your vision or mission for your team that someone doesn't believe in, potentially there's a better place for them to work. And I'm not saying I would fire them by any means, but at some point maybe they would make that choice for themselves. But I think when it comes to like getting back to something, I don't want to say as simple as informatics, but as technical as informatics, how much we need it. I think that, as I said, there are a lot of barriers to informatics, time, resources, time mostly probably. But I think that if someone on your team is struggling with that, that puts you at a lot of risk. So I think, as Emma said, that it is up to the leader to ensure that this is being done and being done correctly. But I think if I was in a real world situation, I think that there are some people that handle bigger workloads or smaller workloads. So I think as a leader, if I'm capable of taking something off your hands so that you're more successful at healthcare informatics, then I'm going to do that. So I think if you are the leader or if you're under the leader, being able to distribute some of those responsibilities, I think maybe could potentially help improve where certain people are struggling, might be another approach.
With the boat.
Good points. And I kind of brought up that question mainly because it hits close to home for me in terms of if we think working with students and working with individuals who are going to be integrated into care, and you can't necessarily, I mean, you can send a student home, but you can't tell the student, hey, don't do anything, and if you end up with a student who is insubordinate and unwilling to learn or something like that, then I kind of agree with Emma in the sense that you have to take them and say, hey, this is what you're doing wrong, and I want to help you fix it. And if your individual can't see that, then maybe they aren't the best individual to learn underneath you. But you have to be able to find a way to teach them and find a way to integrate them into the healthcare process so that way they can be useful and they can be beneficial to the team. Because in terms of the setting that I'm at, a lot of our senior students work autonomous with vision on them as a certified athletic trainer, watching them and being in the same area as them as they provide care. We aren't over their shoulder the entire time asking questions, but we are within the vicinity, watching what they're doing, making sure that they aren't acting out of their own scope of practice, but we aren't completely hovering over them and making sure they're doing everything right. So most of the time we end up in the situation, we always double check the documentation of each one, and at the end of the day we come together and it's like, all right, well, you did this wrong, but you did this right. improve, So it's kind of one of those things where you have individuals who may take on the student role if you're leading them in such a way. So we can say graduate assistants or interns that in one day when we're working in the field, we may have people underneath us who are not necessarily staff, specifically staff. And we have to find out how to best integrate them into the healthcare process, even though we don't have the option to fire them. But making sure that they have that beneficial opportunity to the best care possible, even when they might not be motivated to do so.
Yeah, and you created that, culture to allow them to do that. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I got from the boat scene was when they switched the leaders, the culture of leadership, and I believe it was boat 6, was why they succeeded, because they were motivated because somebody motivated them and it instilled it in them. So I think, Nico, that ties well to your example.
And I feel like that's something that I've encountered a lot in life, and I'm sure you guys have too, are the leadership positions who kind of show their vulnerabilities to the people that are under them, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but their disbelief in something. So I feel like leaders who complain, leaders who are stressed, leaders who are like, no, I don't want to do this, but we have to. If you approach your team like, oh, we have to document this way, I really wish we didn't, and I hate it too, but you guys have to do it, I don't think that that's very effective. And I feel like with healthcare informatics, that's everything. I feel like if a leader is not someone who's going to go online and search for new information for them to apply to their patients, the people under them aren't going to. I feel like as a leader and as an athletic trainer, we have to be able to say, oh, I don't know this, or I want to learn more about this. And I think that that's the only way that the people around us are going to do that as well. Because if you're a leader who says, I already know everything, but you have to go online and search for new information, that's not going to work out very well. So I think the belief, the leader really buying into and believing in their team and in what the profession can do is the only way that these things are going to get done better.
Before we wrap up, is there any other themes or points from the book that you guys wanted to discuss?
When I was reading through the idea of extreme ownership throughout both chapters, and I think it's going to be a theme throughout the entire book and really in clinical practice, and it made me think of a quote that I don't remember when I first heard it, but it was probably in middle school at some point, but I wrote it down because it's always in my head. A leader takes no responsibility for success, but all responsibility for failure. And it's one of those things where athletic trainers or physicians, we want to feel needed. And a patient may or may not say thank you, or may or may not, after they get back into play, after a really long process of you providing care to them, and having everything happen, they may not say anything to you. They may just continue on and you don't see them again. And we have to just accept that and just remember, okay, cool, I did it. But if something happens and it's negatively impacting the patient, that's completely on you. And it's kind of something hard to swallow for some, because they want to take ownership and they want to be like, yeah, I did it. Like, look at me, I fixed this person. And look, and one of the big ones, oh, without me, that team would have never made it to the playoffs. Like I would have done it, like, but without me, they would have never made it because I held the team together, and in that sense, you can't take ownership of the team's success because it was the team who did it. It wasn't you on your own. Maybe it was you leading the team, that helped, but it was ultimately the team as a whole. And we can take this as you treating people, but also your healthcare team. If you're successful and you don't have any safety problems for an entire year, the leader should never say, oh, it's because of what I told them to do. It's because of the success of the entire group. And no one should really ever take the success and say that it's their own, because the success is that of the patient, or the fact that there was no safety problems, or the fact that there were no HIPAA violations, things that should happen anyway, which is why no one should really claim the success as solely for themselves. But I think we can kind of close up our conversation with that thought that I won, or I did it, but you can say that the team as a whole worked together and was able to succeed because they worked as a group.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a mentality that a lot of athletic trainers need to adopt. All right, guys. Well, thanks for the chat. Talk to you later.